Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. The Israel-Hamas hostage prisoner swap begins as Hamas hands over the first 2 of 6 Israeli hostages. 4 more are expected to be handed over soon in return for 602 Palestinian prisoners. US President Donald Trump reverses his statements on Russian aggression and the origins of the war in Ukraine. This follows his call for a direct meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, M23 rebels advance deeper into the eastern region. These developments prompt US Secretary of State Marco Rubio to call for an immediate ceasefire. The United States pressures Ukraine to sign a mineral and resources agreement. The US cites a return for military and financial aid from the Biden administration. President Vladimir Zelenskyy expresses hope for a fair result in the deal. The race for Germany's power is all set to take place on the 23rd of February. Now, having seen how unpopular the mainstream parties have become in the past few years, this German election could well upend the status quo, which has been in place since the reunification of Germany back in 1990, and in doing so sends shockwaves across Europe. According to YouGov's MRP forecast released this Friday, the centre-right Christian Democrats are projected to win this federal election. However, most notable gains are expected for the far-right Alternative for Germany party, which is projected to finish with 20% of the vote. This comes after Elon Musk's over-the-top support for the party. By contrast, Chancellor Olaf Scholz's centre-left Social Democrats are projected to suffer historic losses. YouGov's model estimates the SPD will secure just 16% of the vote. In the middle of polls, a Russian national suspected of planning an attack on the Israeli embassy was arrested by German authorities. Again, in a separate incident on Friday, a stabbing occurred at the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. Joining us for more discussion on the upcoming elections, we are joined by Keith Vaz, chairman of the Integration Foundation, located in London, and Professor Swaran Singh, foreign affairs expert. Thank you very much for joining us. I wanted to come to you first, Keith Vaz. Germany is going through an economic recession right now, and there's also calls to increase defence spending. How might this fees in plans for the future how might this fees in plans for future parties?
Good morning from London. I think this is a pivotal election that's taking place tomorrow in Germany. Both those aspects, an increase in defence spending, obviously due to the election of Donald Trump, which has changed the political landscape of the world, is going to feature in this election. I don't think defence is going to be the defining issue as far as the voters in Germany are concerned. I think migration and immigration policy is going to be the key issue that people are going to vote on in the election tomorrow. And that means, how is Friedrich Merz's party going to do? Is it going to recapture the ground, the imagination of the German people, as was the case with Angela Merkel, still the strongest and most effective German leader, certainly of my lifetime? Or is the right-wing AfD going to take a much bigger chunk of the electorate? I think at the end of the day, you're going to have a coalition. Whatever happens in the election, the other parties have made it very clear that they will not do business with the AfD. And therefore, we're going to have a coalition government in Germany, as we are always going to see because of the electoral system that they have. But I think all countries in the EU have been shocked by what's happened in Washington, D.C., and all of them are committed to increasing defense spending. How? It's difficult to see what's going to be cut from national budgets in order to achieve that. but that is what they have to say, and that is what they will say in order, I think, to get elected. But it's going to be much closer than, of course, in previous elections. I'm afraid the centre-left, the Schulz party, going to do very badly in this election, from being the governing party probably to third ahead of the Greens, and there's going to have to be a coalition with everybody. I don't think that you can get away with not doing that because of the arithmetic of the German elections system.
Professor Sarang Singh, the Alternative for Germany party has been grabbing all the headlines. How popular really are they, and can they really make gains in this election?
Projections are in that direction. In fact, some of the projections are giving them a raise from about 10-12% to now 20, even 30% of vote share, which is creating concerns, as Keith mentioned, in most other parties who do not wish to work with AfD. And I think we have seen several months of instability in Germany because of coalition partners, the problems among themselves. And that, as the projections are, is going to only increase post-elections if you believe the kind of polls and shares of vote that are expected to come to each of these parties. Most estimates are that this alternative for Deutschland, AfD, is going to make the biggest gain this time. Whether it is only creation of social media, I think that would be difficult to imagine. They may not make 30%, but I think they will definitely make biggest gain. Projections are supported by the track record. If you have seen how they sort of managed to get about 90+ seats in the last elections, they recently were able to actually form a government in one of the provinces. And of course, Scholz is supposed to lose in a major way in that sense. So other than the domestic concerns also increasingly are about this being the most powerful large economy in Europe, and now anticipated to take a much stronger role in making Eurozone and Europe much more autonomous as Donald Trump is withdrawing from European engagement. And if they continue to have these problems of coalition and instability at home, they will not be perhaps able to deliver in terms of European security, support to Ukraine, and so on. So concerns are both domestic and international, and in that sense, that kind of derailment even of the opposition party had been long in the view in that sense, since Merkel's last term was already unstable. So we don't know, what is going to happen. But right now, instability appears writ large, and that doesn't speak very positive in terms of Germany playing a role in stabilizing European situation.
Keith Vaz, the leader that you cited, Angela Merkel, one of the most popular German leaders of all time, she famously said, "We can do this," when talking about taking in migrants from across the world into Germany. Do you think that ideology has changed in Germany? Why is migration such at the forefront of this election?
I think there have been a number of incidents that have occurred in different German cities which have involved migrants, and therefore the parties of the far right seize on these very small incidents, obviously very important incidents to the people who are affected, all of them to be condemned by all of us sitting here. But the fact is, these particular incidents are catapulted into the public imagination as an expression of what all immigrants do. But actually, Angela Merkel was quite right to do what she did. She was the bravest, strongest European leader that I have seen. I mean, I'm biased because, of course, I'm a big Tony Blair fan. But the fact is, him apart, she really drove the whole European agenda very, very strongly. She had to do what she did. You cannot, because of Germany's history, leave people at the gate, shut the gates and stop people coming in when you are partly responsible for the fact that they're leaving their countries in the first place. I mean, the Western countries have to realize the reason why you have mass migration is, first of all, because you have some unscrupulous people involved in people trafficking who exploit people, but secondly, because you keep going to war with these countries. If you go and start bombing Syria, and if you ensure that there is instability in the Middle East, people will leave and they will come to live in Europe. So she was only taking what was the responsibility of the German government. She's being blamed, of course, but in terms of economic policy, as Professor Singh has said, Germany is an absolutely crucial country. We cannot have a European project without Germany and France working together. Now, Macron has only 2 years left of his term. So an incoming German chancellor who will be there for about 3 years until the next election will only have a couple of years to work with Macron once you form the government in Germany, which is going to take some time. And that whole vacuum will remain. That's why I'm so keen on Britain rejoining the European Union, because I think we need to be there in order to be part of this project.
Professor Singh, given the fragmentation of voter support, what are the possible coalition scenarios and how might ideological differences between parties influence policy making and governance?
If you notice that a good number of parties have publicly expressed their inability to work with the AfD, that could be the reason that they would like to somehow come together, but that kind of coalition will continue to be very unstable, will not be able to take very decisive actions, both at domestic level and at the level of European initiatives. In that sense, I think we will have this vulnerability of AfD actually becoming the kingmaker at some stage in case the other parties are not able to work together. And the constant, very public, very sharp interventions from United States, Elon Musk, Vice President J.D. Vance, and President Trump himself, will perhaps also add to that whole anxiety within these political parties as to how they are going to work together. And in that sense, I think instability to me seems to be writ large post-elections right now.
Thank you very much, Keith Vaz and Professor Singh, for joining us on that discussion. We now move to some more news updates. Donald Trump has acknowledged that Russia did invade Ukraine on Vladimir Putin's orders, a shift from his earlier stance. He blamed Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy, then US President Joe Biden, for not preventing the attack. Meanwhile, negotiations continue on a mineral deal between the US and Ukraine, with reports suggesting Ukraine could lose access to Starlink if no agreement is reached. Starlink provides crucial internet support for Ukraine's military operations. As talks progress, Zelenskyy has urged Europe to do more to achieve peace and called for closer cooperation with the US. In a separate development, the US has proposed a UN resolution on the war calling for a swift end to the conflict, but without monitoring Ukrainian territory occupied by Russia. That omission was welcomed by Moscow's UN ambassador. We continue this discussion with Gilbert Doctorow, Russian affairs expert located in Brussels, and also Keith Vaz, Chairman, Integration Foundation, located in London. I wanted to talk to you, Keith Vaz, about the European inclusion in peace talks. Zelenskyy has called for more European effort in ending this war. What's your views? Is Europe doing enough?
To make sure that this happens. Remember, it's always been a joint venture. It's always been the United States and the European Union and Britain, because we're outside, working together in order to support Zelenskyy. What's been very interesting is what's been coming out of London. People like Boris Johnson, who one would think would be quite close to Trump and the Republican Party, coming out saying Zelenskyy is not a dictator, we need to support it. Trump is only saying this in order to get attention for this particular issue, and now we can move on. It was always going to end. You cannot have a discussion about Ukraine without Ukraine. Of course, Trump likes to deal on a much higher level and probably doesn't rate Zelenskyy as in terms of being a world leader. He wants to deal with Putin. His big photo call is definitely going to be handshaking with Putin in Riyadh or somewhere else like that. That's what he really wants. He is a news grabber, a headline grabber. So he had to include Zelenskyy because This week, both Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are visiting the United States. They are both going to tell him that unless we work together, we are not going to achieve a long-lasting peace in the area. And that is why he's got to do this. He simply cannot ignore Ukraine. Remember what he promised? He said on day one of my election as president, he was going to end the war in Ukraine. 30 days have now gone. Nothing really substantial has happened.
Yes.
So he needs to get going. Zelensky has got to be included. The European Union has got to be included. You're not going to get a peace unless all these people are involved. The UN resolution, by the way, is neither here nor there. As we all know, most UN resolutions are ignored, but it's a kind of music thing more than anything else. At least they're talking about the UN, which is good news as far as the world is concerned.
Yes, Gilbert Doctorow, could I just get your point of view on Trump flitting on his point of view that Ukraine started the war? What do you think of this?
Well, let's not be distracted by that, because news comes out of the White House that varies from day to day. I'm looking at the long-term position, which was reflected in the negotiations that took place in Riyadh. And there, my fellow panelist is missing the big picture. He's missing what diplomacy is about and how the solution to the Ukraine conflict, which is now called a conflict in the latest UN resolution, not a war, can be found. The resolution will come when there is trust between the parties. There can be no trust between the parties if they don't have diplomatic relations. The fact is that the United States and Russia today have almost no diplomatic channels under which they can negotiate an end to the Ukraine conflict and a reestablishment of normal state-to-state relations. Therefore, the meeting at Riyadh is indicative of the way out, and the way out has no room at this stage for European and Ukrainian participation, because the first stage is to reestablish the diplomatic tools to negotiate anything. That means restoring the US and Russian respective embassies to full functionality. They now are unfunctional, non-functional. There are no ambassadors. They have skeletal staff. The Russian embassy in the United States has no bank accounts that are workable to pay any employees. This is untenable. And Mr. Zelensky's view of this, and Kallas's view from the EU, von der Leyen, are totally irrelevant, as are the comments of my fellow panelists. First, you establish diplomatic relations.
Keith Vaz, could I get your response, please, to why that you believe that it's so crucial for Ukraine and Europe to have a seat at these talks?
Well, just coming back on what Gilbert just said, Donald Trump does not need ambassadors. He does not need diplomats. He's the deal maker. His foreign policy has always been very personal. It's to do with chemistry. So although, of course, the functioning of embassies matter, actually he makes the deals himself. He is dying to go over to Riyadh, shake Putin's hand, as he was with other leaders. So I don't think that this infrastructure really matters to someone like Donald Trump. He is unique in the history of diplomacy. And I've been a Foreign Office minister covering Ukraine. Of course, I know the importance of diplomats, but Donald Trump just isn't in the sphere as far as these issues are concerned. I think at the end of the day, he recognizes, because I think his language has toned down. I don't think Zelensky was unduly critical by saying that the information getting to Trump was not a full set of information. Gilbert could be right. This is because he doesn't have an ambassador. But as he takes most of his news from probably CNN and NewsX World, Trump is never going to have the absolute full picture of what's happening on the ground. But I think at the end of the day, you've got to have a solution that includes the European powers and Zelensky. History will judge very harshly any deal that is being done at that level that does not include Zelensky. And you have to do this. And it's also a warning to other countries that maybe they should not do business with the United States, because at any single moment, the United States could just pull back. But of course, I take Gilbert's point. You need the infrastructure. But Trump is like no other president we've ever had before. He doesn't need infrastructure. He just needs a telephone. He just needs an iPhone. That's all he does. And suddenly, people get a call. Today, Gilbert is a panelist on this program. Tomorrow, he's probably going to be the American ambassador to Russia. That's how Trump works. And we are living in a new age.
Gilbert Doctorow, do you think that we can trust, that Russia can trust Donald Trump in these talks in Saudi Arabia? What do you think the end result might be?
Well, just to go back to what my fellow panelists said, we are at the end of the day, these parties will take part. I agree completely. But we're not at the end of the day, we're at the beginning of the day. And until certain groundwork is done, it is senseless from the Russian standpoint to have a meeting with Donald Trump. Nothing will be resolved by the two presidents if all of the spade work is not done, or to use a more common expression relating to summits, if the Sherpas have not done their job. There is a vast amount of work to do to prepare for that meeting so that it goes well. The last time that we had this personal conduct of diplomacy without any infrastructure, it didn't go so well. In fact, it set the stage for the drama that has been unfolding since February of 2022. I mean, the meeting between Gorbachev and the emissaries from George W. Bush, and the agreement on a handshake that that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east. That didn't go too well. That was not properly prepared. There was no documentation. There was nothing that countries that do not trust one another need to have anything viable in the future. It failed. It brought us to the war in Ukraine because NATO violated every oral promise given. Therefore, the Russians will not agree to a handshake with Donald Trump, and with good reason. So that is a non-starter. The work will be done in advance, and the delegation that Trump sent to Riyadh understood that perfectly.
Gilbert Doctorow and Keith Vaz, thank you very much for joining us on that discussion. We now move on to some more news updates. US President Donald Trump has gone on firing army chiefs and generals, causing a major upheaval to the Pentagon. Meanwhile, Pentagon announces 5 to 8% of civilian employees, adding to controversies. Let's have a look at the report.
US President Donald Trump fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General, and pushed 5 other admirals in an unprecedented shake-up of US military leadership. Trump said in a post on Truth Social that he would nominate former Lieutenant General Dan Kane as the new Air Force General, breaking with tradition by pulling someone out of retirement for the first time to become the top military officer. The president will also replace the head of the US Navy, a position held by Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the first woman to lead a military service, as well as the Air Force Vice Chief of Staff. While the Pentagon's civilian leadership changes from one administration to the next, the uniformed members of the U.S. Armed Forces are meant to be apolitical, carrying out the policies of Democratic and Republican administrations. During last year's presidential campaign, Trump spoke of firing woke generals and those responsible for the troubled 2021 pullout from Afghanistan. Trump praised General Charles Brown for his 40 years of service as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, however, had questioned Brown's appointment, suggesting in his 2024 book that race played a role. Brown, a former fighter pilot, has spoken about facing discrimination in the military. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has announced its plans to fire 5 to 8% of the military civilian employees, which could measure up to 5,400 employees. While that is a small percentage of the probationary employees who are at risk of being fired en masse, the eventual cuts could amount to a significant reduction in the civilian workforce. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now let's take a look at some news updates coming in from North America. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass has dismissed Fire Chief Kristen Crowley. This followed criticism of her management of the January wildfires. The infernos left over 24 dead and led to the destruction of more than 16,000 structures. Mayor Bass cited Crowley's decision to send home 1,000 firefighters on the day the fires erupted. Interim Chief Ronnie Venula has been appointed, while a national search for a permanent replacement is underway. A measles outbreak in northwest Texas has escalated to 90 confirmed cases across 7 counties, with Gaines County reporting the highest number. The majority of those affected are unvaccinated school-aged children. 16 individuals have been hospitalized. Health officials attribute the outbreak to increased non-medical vaccine exemptions and are urging vaccinations to curb further spread. Luigi Mangione has appeared in a Manhattan court, facing charges for the fatal shooting of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. The December incident occurred on a sidewalk, shocking the community. Mangione's defense attorney has raised concerns about the legality of searches conducted during his arrest. The case is ongoing, with the next hearing scheduled soon. Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman has opposed a new trial for Lyle and Eric Menendez, who are serving life sentences for the 1989 murders of their parents. Hochman questioned the authenticity of new evidence, a letter alleging sexual abuse, that the defense claims could exonerate the brothers. This stance contrasts with the previous DA's position, who had advocated for their release based on a better understanding of abuse trauma. The Trump administration has directed federal agencies to cease work related to climate change, including participation in key UN climate assessments. This directive has alarmed scientists and environmentalists, who warn that ignoring climate research could have severe consequences for disasters and environmental policy. And that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.